Live from the SABC headquarters in Auckland Park, Johannesburg, welcome to this Friday edition of The Watchdog. My name is Vuyo Mvoko, and on the show tonight, with 2 days to go before Monday's make-or-break local government poll, political parties wrap their election campaigns. Our panel reflects on what has been the shortest campaign period since the dawn of democracy in 1994. We'll look at the highs and lows, the extraordinary and the mundane. The Watchdog starts now. First, let me introduce you to our panelists for this evening. Professor Susan Boyson is an author of several books on the South African body politic. She is from Mapungubwe. Theo Venter is based at the University of the Northwest. For years now, one of the most quoted members of that university's academic staff. Dr. Pelsitole is a senior research specialist in democracy and governance, in the Democracy and Governance Research Program of the University of the Free State. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Thank you very much for your time. A bit of a late start on the back of that Siyanqoba rally of the ANC. I'm just going to ask each one of you, before we go to some sound bites we're going to play for you to kick off very specific conversations, just what you make of this campaign, the shortest it has been, just from your vantage points, you know, what you make of it, or what you made of it, Professor Boyson.
Good evening, Vuyo. It was certainly a good illustration of an intense period of what I see as hyper-democracy, hyper-accountability. Also in a context, of course, where the ANC is still quite dominant. And if we listen to President Ramaphosa a few minutes ago, promises to be a new party in effect.
A new old party.
That's also one of the most significant things for me of this campaign, that the parties, such as the ANC, was promising really to be something different, was putting itself in the hands of voters, but promised to be something different, something repositioned, something redirected, it's a rebuilt, etc. And that was one phenomenon that was very prevalent. The other, of course, was that it was not just the main political parties, the handful already have, for example, parliamentary representation, but sometimes one went to these dizzying heights almost of discovering new political parties, 325 participating in this election, many of them small community parties that might do well at local level, in particular local municipalities or in bigger metros, but are really unknown and just hoping for those small breakthroughs, and 1,546 total of independents. And so it was really such a heavy, intense concentration of contestation and of trying to reposition political parties.
Theo Venter, from your vantage point, what did you see? What did you hear?
Well, two or three things was quite obvious to me. It is the first time ever that we had a campaign against the backdrop of the COVID pandemic. In other words, that changed certain things, and that changed behavior patterns and how people did things. I think, secondly, we've seen much more use of the social media and the immediacy of the social media and how parties responded to that. And we also saw in the whole intense campaign, like Susan called it, the issue of service delivery. And then towards the end, and this is one of the reasons why my image tonight isn't as clear as it should be, because we've got load shedding. Towards the end of the campaign, we had this load shedding issue, which I think we can debate a little bit. Is it good or is it bad? Would people respond to it or not? So several things that's different from previous campaigns. And maybe just the last point, if we compare this election to the 2016 election, for the ANC, the good news was there was not a Zuma directly involved in the political campaigning, although this time he was definitely in the background. He was somewhere. He was in all discussions. But it was not as if the party had to battle its own precedent like they did in 2016.
Dr. Stoller?
It is quite a different kind of campaigning. From where I sit, I could brand it as a campaigning that's full of party anxiety, because many parties are anxious, and particularly the ANC, about this particular campaign at a local government level. It is also a campaign and a political an election that is full of citizen anxiety. It's quite visible that the citizen is frustrated, and that the citizen has wider choice, but because of the link between the previous chances that the citizen gave parties to be in power and lack of service delivery, it's so obvious that the parties are not going to have it easy this time.
One of the things I noticed, perhaps it's a function of, it could well be because this was the shortest campaign period. In 2019, for example, it was so evident that political parties were battling with funding. I mean, they had serious resource issues. But this time around, that was not as obvious. Hence, I'm saying perhaps it was because, I mean, this campaign period has been, what, 6 weeks, you know, or thereabout. But I didn't get that sense of desperation. I mean, in 2019, I was a political editor somewhere, and I mean, parties were knocking at our doors all the time because they wanted coverage, because, I mean, they didn't have money. They didn't have money to organize a lot of things, including posters out there, buying airtime and that kind of stuff. There was less of that kind of desperation at this time around. I don't know, Professor Booysen, if it's something whether you've noticed anything in that regard.
Perhaps to some extent, yes, Will. Also, one has to consider, because the time was so condensed, so short, in which they could campaign, and they were really slow out of the blocks. There wasn't so much time for them to consider all the different opportunities and to try to harness all of those. They were very much depending on their own initiatives here and there. And I certainly notice the different style. For example, if one just drives down streets, different areas of towns, and the poster wars that parties have hardly had time to put up their posters. Mm. And many of them only went up in the last few days. And so there wasn't all that contest of who did what damage, and the parties didn't have so much time to mobilize, I think, around possible unfair treatment, or this party had more space than that one. And there's just the sheer numbers of the parties also made it much more of a contested space where individual parties didn't have time to rise in their claims that they need better treatment, and so many political parties, all one had really seen or heard of them was an occasional appearance in the media when they had time exactly to voice their dissatisfaction on issues. And so political parties, there was a great sense of equalization in the type of campaigns they did, except the ANC are very much differentiated. They could promise promises and bring all these undertakings, and all the other parties had their campaigns cut out for them in just the desperately poor service delivery to date. So political parties really had a tough time. And for the bulk of these 325 parties that are contesting nationally across all localities, the bulk of them, with the total of their campaigns, was probably their names is going to be their names on the ballots.
Well, I want to take a listen to a soundbite. ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa addressing the Siangoba rally a short while ago. Just take a listen to this, which has been a consistent message from him throughout this campaign.
Our people are hoping that the African National Congress will emerge victorious. But we have also heard about the great difficulties that our people are experiencing. We have heard how our people, families, are having to deal with hunger, are having to deal with poverty every day. And we've also heard about the problem that our people are experiencing by being unemployed. We've also seen how many of our people live in informal settlements without basic services. Comrades, we've also heard about crime and violence, particularly violence against women and girls in our country. Many communities have been able to tell us about all these challenges. Comrades, yes, as we have been through the country, we have been able to hear our people. Our people are saying they want the basic needs that they have to be met so that they can have a decent life.
Thea Venter, I mean, I think that soundbite about sums up, what has been the message of the ANC, that, we've had problems. Yes, we couldn't do the things that people expected of us. But, hey, we're promising something better this time around. Trust us. Do you think it has worked?
Well, in the first 2 weeks, I thought this whole campaign was all about an apology, an extended apology for anything and everything. And towards the last 2 to 3 weeks, it seems to me, they changed gear towards promising what they can deliver. Now, you must remember that every citizen in the country has got a different experience of local government and what's going around him. I traveled yesterday through the Free State, several towns, and if you travel through those towns, I sat there thinking, what would the experience be and what would the promise feel like when you sit in a town like Senekal or a town like Vicksburg or wherever. So I think Susan mentioned it in the beginning that it is a very interesting campaign of reinventing themselves, the ANC reinventing themselves. Now the problem is it's easy to go through the steps of reinventing, but to filter that down to the structures and to the municipal managers and to the officials and to the party members, that is a completely different kettle of fish. I must say, tonight, he didn't make the same mistake as about 2 weeks ago when he said in a wide-ranging discussion, the president, when we're in power, we will deploy. Now tonight he said we will elect. And I think that was a very specific choice of words, that this thing of deploying against the backdrop of the Zondo Commission and corruption and what, I think somebody that helped him with the speech said, don't use that again, at least not tonight.
Professor Stolle, what did you get from or see? What did you hear from the message that the ANC has really been punting over the past 5-6 weeks?
I don't think that it is a good position that the president of any party can be put in to go around acknowledging the things that he's been acknowledging consistently. President Ramaphosa has been acknowledging consistently throughout the country, and to be selling basics. I mean, this is a dilemma with South Africa generally, including other political parties. How is it that so many years on, even within democracy that is admittedly young, we are still selling basics, we are still selling fixing potholes, we are still selling delivery of water when it is possible to be talking about that being fixed, as Theo was saying, at a very organized level of professional efficiency on a daily basis. And then thinking around new ways of finding water in the wake of climate change. How is it that we are still talking about fixing potholes and cleanliness? It's just not right what the parties and the party leaders are having to go through. And I think that if what they are saying in public is not complemented by serious caucus meetings around where it is that we are losing it, comrades, in each and every one of these parties, then we are in trouble. I'm just hoping that all of this stands about, first of all, selling the basics, and secondly, for the party that was in power issuing apologies, is being met at the background with strategizing differently, because no country wants to believe that you can sell for an election that you're going to be giving people water and expect that people are happy that you know that they have not been having something as basic as water.
Professor Booysen, I mean, from what he said, towards the end of that speech, he seems convinced that South Africans, or at least they will do well in this election, that notwithstanding the disappointments with them, but, you know, majority of South Africans are still with them and they will support them, and they are going to come out of this election victorious.
Yes, indeed, for you. It is very clear that the ANC fights election campaigns in a very different way from standard political parties. This was a former liberation movement, a party that is so fused with state power for close to 3 decades now. And they have that confidence that they are not going to be dislodged from that. And he campaigned on that ground of the ANC identity. This is an organization with a very close association with the people, and the people vice versa mutually very closely relate to the ANC. It is fascinating that he was really placing the ANC in the hands of the people, saying, this is your party, basically saying, you make of it what you want it to be, but yes, trying to prepare the ground for that in that saying, acknowledging that there have been so many mistakes. But really part of the ANC campaign here was then to involve the community. And here he was telling the community on several parts of tonight's speech that this is in your hands. And we had put the selection of candidates, election in community meetings, branch meetings, in your hands. He was really building that close identification are reinstituting that close identification between people and ANC. So he was gambling a lot, I would say, politically on the outcome of tonight's meeting, but he really played on all fronts, both the identity part and the improvement of services, really promising that, and in pointing to legislation that will be changed to bring better, more accountable, in some respects, municipal government, looking at the appointment of municipal managers, the selection and election of mayors. And so really opening the ANC to the people, to communities, to make the ANC theirs. Of course, that is besides the fact that this was a continual, once again, so typical of election campaigns, and very specifically also ANC election campaigns, to come onto this claim discovery route that it is election time that the ANC discovers or hears about the suffering and the problems in communities. And that of course is quite incredulous, but that is part of the repertoire that has to be put out in front of the people to make sure that the ANC makes people believe that the party can do things better. And of course, just one last point in terms of barometer and stressing the ANC candidates having pledged X, Y, Z, and that there is a barometer that will monitor their progress. That is quite a far-fetched, far-reaching, I should say, step, because that really seems like a final stand after putting that on the table. And if it's really made to be effective, such barometer and continuous detailed monitoring of individual councillors, then there is no going back in hearing and discovering new forms of suffering and next time around.
Now, compare or contrast what the ANC and its president have been saying and doing with what John Steenhuisen and his team have been doing today. He spent, the last day of his campaign in Cape Town. I think no prizes for guessing why. But let's just take a listen to what he said today, John Steenhuisen in Cape Town.
Our country is in a dangerous, dangerous place. We're in a precarious position with a national government that cannot even do the basics anymore. Water, electricity, sanitation are basics. They cannot get it right. So now is not the time for you to waste your vote on some party based around some personality or a race or a language or a culture. Now is not the time to watch the media and our opponents try and make this election about anything else other than service delivery. They're trying to make it about anything else other than service delivery. Now's not the time to try something new and untested. So, on Monday, we're going to give our opponents here in the city of Cape Town a snot club.
And it's what you're saying, Professor Stoll, isn't it? The first part, of that bite. That's the basics. We're still talking about the basics. We're not talking about who has distinguished themselves from the rest, in terms of ideas or like really revolutionary things that need to be done in the local government space. We're still talking about basics: water, electricity, sewage.
Well, the reason why it is so sad that we haven't mastered the basics with parties that have been traditionally associated with fighting for extension of the rights to the people. The reason why that is so sad is that people are now hesitating between that knowledge and the kind of space where they have to deal with whether the other parties are good with social cohesion. And it's a very difficult space, and this is the space actually where the DA is right now. Because in as much as he's harping on the ANC's failure on the basics, one sits there and wonders whether the DA will be in Bambai and Nanda and all of these places actually. So there are issues in terms of what all parties are short of in terms of being credible towards various constituencies. And some of them in relation to just generally the social cohesion and blending with different groups of people. Secondly, the issue of classism in South Africa generally, where you can see that certain issues institutionally, certain people are faceless, they are spoken of in terms of statistics only. And then thirdly, just the issue of the relationship with redress. So I don't envy the South African citizen at all between this dilemma that the other parties are mopping around basics and the other, which is basically, can we trust that there is sufficient social cohesion in other spaces that whatever capacity that they have will be disseminated with integrity or recognizing integrity of all?
Thea Fenter, I don't know what you make of it, why you think it is that John Steenhuisen never forgets or puts it up there all the time, tells people not to waste their vote on smaller, untested parties. Why do you think that's so important for him?
I don't think it's only important to him, it's also part of the Helen Zille narrative. It's part of the DA narrative, and John Steenhuisen, of course, is the leader and the second biggest or largest party battling to retain that position. In other words, their whole strategy, and in the beginning I thought the DA kicked off fairly well, and then they started scoring own goals, several of them in the campaign. But tonight, the speech that we listened to is a very specific speech to a very specific audience in the Western Cape. And I think if I listen to the language and some of the Afrikaans words that he used, that is the vernacular of the Western Cape, kind of language that I wouldn't use even up here in the Northwest. But in any case, so that I think is the battle of the DA. Because if the ANC has a battle on its hands to maintain 50% of the national vote as a kind of a benchmark, I think the DA has got a battle about the 20% margin, whether they're going up or down, or whether they're going to end up above or below. And the reason why I'm saying it's a battle of those two numbers is whatever happens on Monday. And remember, although we play around with national figures and percentages, it's neither here nor there. And it will actually determine what happens in local governments, but we will remember the proportional votes specifically for the ruling party towards the end of next year, and for the DA towards 2024. So in a sense, we're busy with a political canvas that we're playing on, and we're filling in spots for next year and the year after that, and so on. So we're actually at a very interesting spot. And the last thing that I would like to say, just a reminder of what happens in the Western Cape as well as what happened in Soweto tonight. It's not a good idea to have elections in November, because if you look at all the elections we had since 1910, and I'm adding the previous dispensation to it, April and May are the typical months to do these things. It is just too unreliable to have a big rally on the 31st or the 30th of October due to weather patterns.
Professor Booysen, quick one from you on just on the DA.
I couldn't hear on the
DA, what you make of John Steenhuisen's sort of parting short, on of course reflecting on their campaign over the past 6 weeks.
Yes, thank you. I could hear this time. Yeah, the DA sitting with this irony that what they say about services, service delivery failures, lapses, neglect, that is largely true, but it is not necessarily going to be the grounds on which people vote. South African citizens, voters, have a huge value attached to identity and looking at which political party is more likely to listen to their grievances and their problems when those are being offered for attention. And that is where the ANC comes with that advantage, a big advantage of having been in power for an extensive period of time. And it is seen, has been seen across many elections and continues to be seen this time around as a type of parent entity. Perhaps they do not get the local sewage flowing as it should, or the roads are potholed, etc. But it's also seen as a party that on another level, national level, though most definitely, has been providing for different forms of social security, social grants, some, even if it's often very rudimentary, but health services. It is a party that is seen in a sense as a parent, and we know this from narratives that voters relate when they speak about delivery and governance, a parent that brings the food home. And we know that Helen Zille, she was reported a few days ago of expressing her frustration over that sentiment and saying that I believe that people should be made aware or should be better understanding of the fact that it is national government and it is ratepayers who really, and taxpayers who really pay for all those services. But that is not the association that is in people's minds. And that is where small political parties, opposition parties generally, really have an uphill battle to fight against an ANC that can come with those credentials. And an ANC now on top of it that comes with Cyril Ramaphosa, a strong voice from him, as he gave tonight in those speeches, that's promising to make it, keep it as a people's party and to renew it and to get it out of it. Fascinating, just to jump into Ramaphosa's words again. He wasn't referring just to his new dawn, but he was acknowledging that this is a party that is in darkness now, and after darkness, there will be a dawn. And that is really so much of the crux of this election campaign and the disadvantage that parties like the DA has, that they have to fight against the image of Ramaphosa, who is trusted, quite well trusted, and better trusted than the ANC itself.
Julius Malema earlier today also addressed his party's final rally, where he pulled no punches, Professor Stoller. But let's take a listen first to just a bit of what he had to say.
They locked down South Africa. Do not forget, when we were hungry, expecting them to give us food parcels, they gave food parcels to their relatives. And when we wanted to go out to go and look for food, they sent soldiers to shoot at us and to arrest our people for not wearing the mask.
What do you think he was trying to do there, Prof? Professor Stoller?
Yes, I think that we're seeing here a look partly in some political parties, well, in fact, maybe just the statements that you quote, obviously a look into doing things and solving the basic things that we're talking about. But some parties are coming across as dealing with the issue of morality, actually. And they are coming out to say, look at the core behavior of other parties and we will do differently. Obviously, he's harping on the recent issues related to COVID, and one wonders to what extent that will actually create bitterness of the citizens, such that they see the ANC negatively. But generally speaking, the parties that are using the moral ticket will cite those things, and then they will also cite corruption, and that will stick quite a lot. And some of them will obviously cite historical injustices and the failure to actually have a clear plan towards redress. So they're all tussling with this moral ticket to some extent at some point. And the EFF, being one related to land more especially, is dealing with the historical morality, as well as dealing on the side of the ANC, dealing with the recent issues of COVID and corruption, and they are using that ticket quite a lot.
What do you make of what the EFF leader had to say, Thea Fender?
Well, what I heard very specifically, and I think Pearl also referred to it, is that if you refer to what happened pre-1994, then of course you're in the apartheid years, and if you compare that, as per Julius Malema, to what the ANC is currently doing, I think the comparison is obvious. And that is to show where the EFF will take its supporters and the people if they score a win. They've got a very difficult constituency to deal with. And if we look at the numbers, and I know you've discussed it several times in other programs, then the big disappointment for the EFF in terms of his message is that the people under the age of 35 are not our most active registered voters in the country. And if he harvests or gets a lot of his support under that age group, it will be a disappointment. That places a kind of a ceiling on his support, I think. But he may, in this election, get some advantages out of the weakness of the ANC. The ANC ended very strong, and I think Susan referred to the fact that they have a very specific kind of campaigning, and they usually end strong. But by Monday, when people go into the polls and when they do their thing, we know that people take a decision of where to vote and who to support long ahead of time. Most of the voters have made up their minds a long time ago. You have a small margin of people that are still not sure where to vote. They may be influenced by the latest things and by what he is saying and by load shedding and things like that. But I think the majority of the electorate already made up their minds a long time ago.
Well, speaking of which, I mean, by all accounts, Professor Booysens, looks like, the top three will still finish, strongest. And I'm wondering what you think of perhaps the next category of players. I'm talking your IFPs, your UDMs, your ACDPs, your FF pluses. Do you see them making any significant and meaningful gains in this election?
We are unlikely to see major breakthroughs at this stage. And the breakthroughs are usually quite predictable. Think back of the rise of the UDM, of COPE, of the EFF. The EFF has been the one with staying power and is even if it's on small scale, is the one who's growing. The ANC and the DA, just to refer to them very briefly, are both shrinking parties rather than growing parties. They're both very likely, even if they can still do relatively well or very well, but to shrink by a few percentage points in this election. And that means very few votes are released for the uptake by other voters Also in a context, of course, we're talking about proportions, but in a context that the overall electorate has been shrinking from 2019 to now by more than 500,000 voters. And so there isn't much space for parties to grow. But granted, this is a local government election. And in small communities and small municipalities, it is quite possible that some of these very unknown, existing or new community political parties, if I can call them that they can gain a seat or two and be in very important king-making roles, deciding roles in those municipalities. Back at the national overall level, in a specific metro like Johannesburg, it is possible, and some polls predict that Action, SAFM and Mshaba could almost match the kind of percentage that the EFF has been gaining. In other places, like in the Western Cape, there's a small party, the Land Party, that has been taking a ward off the ANC in one place. Here in Johannesburg by-elections, we've seen Al Jama'ah and the Unlikely Patriotic Alliance gaining seats. So there is a range of small micro parties that can break through in specific conditions in communities, and you have a powerful role there. But overall, the IFP, parties like the IFP of course has been improving in 2019 election after the NFP was basically eliminated. And in this election, two other known political parties like the NFP and I wouldn't be surprised if COPE is added to that, would be very unlikely to emerge in relatively strong, even if it's one or two seats and king-making roles in local municipalities. So this election is definitely also going to take a toll on several of the small political parties, and there are many, many of them. But big newcomers, unlikely.
Professor Stolle, I mean, we have a record high number of independents, contesting or set to contest this election, more than 1,500. I don't know what you make of that, or what you think, and from what we've seen so far, whether, they are going to make as much of a dent as they hope to. And of course, I mean, we know for a fact that people like Mmusi Maimane, have really been at the forefront, championing the independence cause, because I mean, your guess is as good as mine as to why he wants to do that, because I think it's apparent that he sees these independents, or organizing these independents, as the basis on which he can build a party or movement or whatever he may have in mind. But what do you make of the record high number of independents that are going to contest this election?
This is why I branded this particular election as one filled with anxiety and frustration. That is not just born out of how much power one is going to get. It's actually a citizen issue. Some of these independent candidates are going to get a seat, and they will have people pinning their hopes on them. This is based on the experience of real trauma that the citizen is experiencing out there. And those that had been working with the trauma, the absence of the municipality, the mess with the accounts in the municipality, even the rates accounts, and they had been using things such as ratepayers associations to rise up and fix things for themselves. Some of those are actually going to get a seat, and they will have some people pinning their hopes in there. Of course, for each scenario, it depends on the profile of the citizenry, the hesitation towards some parties in that profile, which will bring back perhaps some of the municipalities and give them a chance. But in terms of some of these candidates, they will get in there because of what they had been trying to do. And whatever else the others that might seem a little bit like chancers, may diffuse the vote and create these collisions and at least create a situation of havoc and conversation in these municipalities, which perhaps is due in South Africa, given all of the things that even the ANC was acknowledging tonight about issues of capacity, about the issues being at official level, and all of those things which are now ripe to be considered in the space of electioneering and politicking.
Thea Venter, in the, less than a minute that we have, one looks at other, shall we call them, fringe parties. Professor Stoller talks about chancers. I'm not saying they are, but I mean, are there people or parties you look at and wonder, what are they smoking?
well, firstly, the system allows for it.
Yes,
and
no doubt about that.
That is one of the issues of proportional representation that is a fairly universal phenomena. If you can afford, you can have, remember 2019, the Purple Cow Party and all those kind of things. But sometimes, especially with what I think Pearl mentioned it earlier on, identity politics. Identity politics in South Africa is emerging in interesting and funny ways. And if you hear people talking a very specific community language, a very specific regional political language, then you understand there is a development in the country where the bigger parties can't absorb these kind of issues. We saw what happened with the DA when they tried that game. It badly backfired on them. But I think a lot of the smaller parties are very specific issue-driven parties, and usually they appear and then disappear.
And that's where we're going to leave it this evening. Special thanks to our panel for this evening. Thea Venter, Professor Pearl Sithole, and Professor Susan Boyson. That's our show for this evening. Of course, we're going to have a very busy weekend. Special voting opens tomorrow. We'll be covering that for you. And of course, on the eve of the election on Sunday, we'll be at it for a good few hours, as well on election day. So do stay with SABC News, as we'll be bringing you live coverage of this election 24 hours a day. That's where we're going to leave it for tonight. To join us again tomorrow and on Sunday and on Monday and the day after that. Have a good night and a great weekend.